Welcome to the Restricted Handling Daily Intel Brief. Let's dig in. Here's what's been going on in Russia in the last 24 hours. The biggest development today is that Ukraine's fight with Russia is increasingly becoming a battle over who can adapt faster. The latest moves from Kyiv and its European partners show a shift away from simply surviving Russian attacks and toward building a long-term defense ecosystem designed around the realities of this war. That was on full display in Paris, where Ukraine and its partners advanced a new effort to create a European-backed ballistic missile defense network. The centerpiece is the Freya project, a Ukrainian-led effort to build a lower-cost alternative that can work alongside systems like Patriot rather than waiting for existing Western stockpiles to catch up. Ukraine's defense industry has become one of the most surprising stories of this war. Companies that did not exist before the invasion are now producing drones, missiles, and other battlefield systems at industrial scale. Firepoint, for example, has grown from a small startup into a company with thousands of employees producing weapons already used against Russian targets. But the challenge Kyiv is taking on now is much harder. Building a missile that hits a target is one thing. Building a missile that can reliably intercept another missile moving at several times the speed of sound is the highest level of missile engineering. This is the part of the defense world where small mistakes create very expensive failures. That challenge explains why Europe is trying to build capacity now rather than simply buy more systems later. France announced it will allow Ukraine to produce French-designed weapons, including Aster air defense interceptors, Scalp cruise missiles, and precision-guided bombs. Ukraine will also receive additional SAMP-T air defense systems and eventually Rafale fighter aircraft. The broader message is that Europe is trying to create a defense industrial base that can sustain a long confrontation. Ukraine is no longer viewed only as a country receiving weapons. It is becoming a partner shaping how those weapons are designed, built, and employed. At the same time, Ukraine continues to pressure Russia's strategic depth by targeting the infrastructure that keeps the war machine running. The important update here is the cumulative effect. Ukrainian strikes against Russian fuel facilities, ports, rail connections, and maritime routes are creating problems that extend far beyond individual targets. Crimea remains a major focus. Ukrainian operations have increasingly targeted the systems that connect the peninsula to Russia, including transportation links, fuel storage, air defenses, and maritime logistics. The goal is to make Crimea harder to sustain and more expensive for Moscow to defend. That pressure is now affecting Russia's economy and military support network. Fuel shortages have spread into agriculture, transportation, and volunteer organizations that move supplies to Russian forces. Some Russian groups supporting troops in Ukraine say they are struggling to deliver basic equipment because gasoline availability has deteriorated. That is a difficult problem for Moscow because energy has always been one of Russia's strongest strategic advantages. The Kremlin has spent decades building influence around oil and gas. Now those same systems are becoming a vulnerability. The consequences are also appearing among Russia's partners. Kyrgyzstan, which receives more than 90% of its petroleum products from Russia, has banned fuel exports indefinitely because of supply concerns. Tajikistan is also looking for alternative sources. These are small countries compared with Russia, but they show how pressure on Russian energy infrastructure can ripple outward. Another major development is the widening cyber confrontation between Russia and Europe. The European Union and United Kingdom have announced new sanctions against Russian intelligence-linked cyber actors, including members of the FSB and GRU. The focus is increasingly on what officials describe as Russia's broader cyber ecosystem: intelligence services working alongside criminal groups, proxy organizations, and influence networks. One of the key cases involves the FSB's 16th Center, which European governments blame for cyber operations targeting critical infrastructure. Poland's energy sector was among the targets highlighted by officials, with British authorities warning that a successful attack could have caused major disruptions during winter. France has also attributed cyber activity against French government and defense-related networks to Russian intelligence. The targets reportedly included defense institutions, diplomatic networks, and organizations connected to sensitive technology. This is becoming a familiar Russian playbook. Moscow has repeatedly combined intelligence collection, cyber operations, disinformation, and covert influence efforts into one broader strategy. The battlefield may be in Ukraine, but the pressure campaign extends across Europe. Russia's intelligence services are also continuing efforts to work around sanctions by acquiring technology through international networks. A recent focus is Japan, where Western intelligence officials say Russian military intelligence has used commercial cover and intermediary networks to obtain dual-use technology. The reported operation involved an alleged GRU officer operating through Russia's Aeroflot presence in Tokyo and using logistics channels to move components through third countries. Japan has acknowledged it faces a growing counterintelligence challenge. The country has advanced technology, but its post-war intelligence structure has historically limited some counterespionage authorities. Russia appears to be looking for exactly those kinds of gaps. Inside Ukraine, President Volodymyr Zelensky is continuing to reshape his government during a difficult period. The dismissal of Prime Minister Yulia Sviridenko reflects an effort to reorganize leadership around wartime priorities, including energy security, military support, and EU integration. Potential replacements include figures from Ukraine's energy and defense sectors. The challenge is balancing the need for fresh leadership with the reality that wartime governments also require continuity. There is also a new political uncertainty in Washington following the death of Senator Lindsey Graham. Graham had become one of the most influential Republican supporters of Ukraine and had a unique relationship with President Trump. His death comes as a sanctions package targeting Russia's wartime economy was gaining momentum. Supporters argue the legislation could increase pressure on Moscow by targeting countries that continue buying Russian energy exports. The question now is whether another political figure can maintain the same influence inside Washington. On the battlefield, Ukraine is continuing its effort to create pressure beyond the front lines. Ukrainian strikes have disrupted Russian shipping activity in the Sea of Azov, forcing Moscow to consider alternative routes for grain exports. The disruption matters because that maritime space supports commercial exports, military logistics, and other economic activity. Russia continues launching missile and drone attacks against Ukrainian infrastructure, including energy and port facilities. Ukraine has reported intercepting many of these attacks, but the pressure on air defenses remains significant as Russia continues using larger strike packages. Finally, Russia is preparing its society for a longer confrontation. Moscow is expanding military education in schools, increasing drone instruction, and incorporating artificial intelligence into youth programs. The Kremlin is also increasing funding for patriotic education campaigns, digital content, and media designed to normalize military service. That's all for today. Be good to one another, keep your critical thinking switched on, and remember, powerful people can survive a little scrutiny. Find the Daily Brief at restrictedhandling.substack.com.